Hi, I'm Casey Frashante, professional astrologer, and today I wanted to give a presentation on the transits, solar arcs, progressions, and eclipses that were active when Dave Grohl was found or admitted to cheating on his wife and having a child outside of wedlock with his mistress. I don't really know how to phrase it. So basically, Dave Grohl is a rock musician, most noticeable or most notable for his role as the drummer in Nirvana, but he's been the frontman of this band called Foo Fighters for as long as I've been born. He married his wife Jordan in 2003. They have three daughters together. In September of 2024, so last year, he made a statement on Instagram that reads, I've recently become the father of a new baby daughter born outside my marriage. Okay. Um, I wanted to go through firstly his natal chart and general temperament and maybe discuss any red flags I see pertaining to him being a cheater or red flags I would consider him to have that might lead someone to behave in a way that allows them to cheat on their wife. And granted, I know literally anyone can cheat on anyone. It's not really about that, but I will point out what I think caused all of this in his psyche. Any transits, progressions, solar arcs, and eclipses that were active for him around the time this would have occurred. And we'll also look at his solar return chart for the year of 2024. So let's take a look at his chart, and we will start with his sun. And firstly, what is the sun? The sun is our most immediate purpose in this lifetime. It's our quest, the mission that we're on, and the qualities that we're learning to develop. He's got his sun in Capricorn, and it is conjunct the ascendant. His whole quest is about becoming an authority figure, if not the authority figure. He's meant to be conducting his life responsibly, learning to conduct his life responsibly, and to ascend to the top of any hierarchy that he finds himself in, and to get there through mastery, professionalism, and hard work, which all sounds, really great. This sun is square Saturn in his third house, and it rules his first house as Capricorn rising. Frustration is a huge theme with him. Frustration about what I just stated is a huge theme. And there is always, with Sun in hard aspect to Saturn, a huge sense of inadequacy. With Saturn being in Aries, for him, this is a personal sense of inadequacy that he has. Saturn's in fall, it's a square aspect. Saturn is his chart ruler, squaring his ascendant and sun. Some squares are more square than others, is what I'm trying to say with that. We're not going to mention the positive attributes of Saturn at all, or Saturn in hard aspect. Yes, squares can be worked through. Considering what happened, I don't think he's worked through this square. That's just my opinion. Sun square Saturn, generally a huge yearning to be considered important. Desperate to be seen and acknowledged and admired, especially with the sun on the ascendant. The Aries Capricorn square, because Saturn in Aries, Sun in Capricorn, he might assume that the rules don't really apply to him anymore, especially he's in his 50s at this point. He feels like he's done all the hard work, the rules don't apply to him anymore. Tendencies to stomp on others to feel secure in his position within the hierarchy. I think his chart is a great example of the Kronos myth in Greek mythology. Kronos is the god associated with Saturn, and the myth goes essentially that Kronos castrated his father, usurped his role, and then devoured his own children out of fear that they'd one day do the same thing to him. I think this is some kind of mythology within his psyche that he carries with him and has carried with him his entire life. If we look at his moon, which is the personality of the individual, the baby and child within us all, our unconscious behavioral patterns, how and where we find security. We also tend to fall back on our moons in times of stress. He has this moon in Sagittarius. He has a reluctance to be tied down. He has a disregard for responsibility, doesn't take life too seriously, which can be a good or bad thing, depending how you look at it. Feels as though all experiences he goes through are like good or bad. Like the experiences he goes through in life, whether they're good or bad, he only sees them as learning opportunities, which, if you know anything about Sag moons, they can be very hypocritical. I find them to be the know-it-alls of the zodiac. And so if they go through a hard time, will cause other people to go through a hard time, they'll say, well, I learned so much through this experience. And when you try to confront them and say, I thought you already knew everything anyways, I thought you already knew everything there is to know, they tend to not like that. I find they throw rocks from glass houses. They have to be the smartest person in the room at all times. You can't tell a Sag Moon anything because, like I said, you try to confront them about certain things that they've done or said in the past and how that contradicts with how they're acting or what they're saying now. They don't like that. And he's got the moon in the 10th house. He's sensitive to public opinion as well. Also, with the Sag Moon, yes, those negative traits I mentioned before can be mitigated by certain aspects. I don't think they're mitigated with him. He has a sextile between Jupiter and Uranus. In the 8th house, very freedom orientated. This is YOLO vibes to the extreme. Someone that doesn't consider the consequences. He's a Capricorn rising. If we go back to that rising sign, Capricorn rising, he views the world through a very realistic, based on other things in his chart, I'm going to say cutthroat kind of lens as well. He's probably a social climber or a strategist in that regards. And going back to the Saturn square in the ascendant, we're not looking at the sun, not weaving the sun into this part. He's probably, because the ascendant is the start of the relationship axis, it's not just the individual, it's the relationship axis as well. Probably feels the need to be in control of his relationships and potentially views himself as more societally important than the partner. Considering any kind of angular placements, he's got this Mars in Scorpio conjunct his midheaven. And this is, I'm interpreting as someone that is going to get to the top by all means necessary, obsessed with status, with it being in Scorpio, conjunct midheaven, obsessed with status, obsessed with getting to the top, especially when you consider all of that Saturn and Capricornian influence in his chart. So, do I see any indications of him being a cheater? He doesn't have any oppositions in his chart. That's kind of a red flag for me. No oppositions mean he doesn't learn through relating. He doesn't see himself through the eyes of his relationships, he doesn't see himself through his partner's eyes. He has Sun conjunct the ascendant, as we've gone over, self-centered. It's square Saturn. He's also insecure. Moon in Sagittarius. Need I say more about that? Venus in Pisces, non-discriminatory when it comes to his relationships, particularly with women. This Venus is trine Mars. I think he's very quick to relate and have his emotions kind of aroused. And Venus is also trine the midheaven, which means he's popular. That is what I think maybe contributed to all of this. Next, I want to look at his progressions on their own because I'm trying a new way of displaying this to you guys. If we look at his progress chart standalone, his progress moon was in actually we'll look at his progress chart contacting his natal chart. So we'll do the bi-wheel. I think it's this one. Yeah. And I don't have like the dates exact for this. I put it at the midpoint of about when all of this was happening. So his birthday, around his birthday in 2024. The transits and stuff, I'm gonna have to notate where they were moving, but follow along. His progress moon was in Sagittarius conjuncting his natal Mars. This is his progress moon here on the outer wheel. During this era, his progress moon would have conjuncted his natal Mars here. This is acting on impulse to me. The progress moon moves about 1 degree a month, by the way. Then his progress moon would have conjuncted his natal moon, which I'm interpreting as old habits dying hard. Progress moon squared his natal Venus, so this moon here would have squared his natal Venus. His birth chart is in the inner wheel. That's just major indulgence to me. His progress. Sorry for snorting as well. I'm getting over a cold. I don't know if I mentioned that already. His progressed Mercury was square natal Neptune. So his progressed Mercury at 27 degrees of Aquarius was square his natal Neptune at 28 degrees of Scorpio. So this would have been a longer transit because we're not talking about the progressed moon anymore. This progression for him would have lasted approximately about 4-ish years, if I had to guess, based on my mental maths. Progressed Mercury square natal Neptune is poor choices and reasoning. Also, Mercury rules his 5th house of romance, and some astrologers equate it with sex as well, but I equate it just with romance and children. And also rules his eighth house of taboos and legacies and collateral and whatnot. Also, I wanted to touch on the fact that his natal chart is primed for this to happen. You might hear a lot of astrologers mentioning something called the natal promise. The natal promise is exactly how it sounds. There are things in your natal chart where an astrologer can see you are primed to have happen to you in this life when it gets triggered by the progressions and transits and eclipses and etc. You're meant to experience these things for whatever reason. And if you don't have the natal promise of something in your chart, it's just not going to happen. I've mentioned in one of my earlier videos, if you don't have a Jupiter Uranus aspect, you are not going to win the lottery. It's not promised to you. Dave Grohl has this promise to him in his chart. His fifth house and his eighth house have the same ruler, which is Mercury. And that Mercury is squared by his Mars in Scorpio. This is all natally as well, which is secretive, but it's conjunct the midheaven, which means something will be brought to light into the public once triggered. And that's what I was saying when this kind of promised to him in his natal chart, but who knows when that was going to happen. But obviously, we can see it in the astrology that I'm presenting to you now. Anyways, his progressed Saturn and Venus were square his natal sun. Um, so here's his progressed Saturn and Venus in Aries, squaring his natal sun. I interpreted this as coping and self-soothing to his own detriment, self-sabotaging type of behavior. And if we just take a look at his standalone progress chart, just to see his progress lunation cycle, which I like to talk about, he was in essentially a disseminating or last quarter moon, which basically means he's already peaked when he was in a progress full moon cycle, already peaked. Now what? I also consider this to be the final sprint of the progress lunation cycle before the balsamic phase hits, which is the incubation period. So, based on his progressions, I mentioned acting on impulse, old habits dying hard, indulgence, the poor reasoning with his progressed Mercury squaring his natal Neptune, and Mercury rules his fifth house and his eighth house. Bad choices were going to be made around this time. The progressed Saturn and Venus squaring his natal sun, and that's kind of coping, self-soothing, self-sabotaging kind of energy. And then in this disseminating and closing square, he's already peaked, so now what? Basically. And then if we look at the transits, what might that be corroborating? Again, I don't have the exact dates for every thing I'm going to mention, so I will notate any changes with that. All right. On the 5th of May 2023, he had an eclipse conjunct his midheaven. Eclipses open the doorway for things to happen. Something was going to happen with him publicly within the next 6 months, or allow things to kind of manifest publicly within the next 6 months. The 10th house also rules your vocation and career and your reputation. Something was happening there. He was experiencing transiting Saturn around the start of my time search for this, so around, I think it was July, was when it started. He had transiting Saturn in his first house, which can give a sense of feeling depressed, feeling like you're taking on too much responsibility, having general sense of low vitality. This Saturn was also squaring his natal moon, so transiting Saturn squaring his natal moon. This can be a feeling of depression, feeling dissatisfied by his marriage, specifically because we're talking about his relationship axis. The ruler of his first house was squaring the ruler of his seventh house. I think this was dissatisfaction in the home. And for example, I've got a moon Saturn square natally. There's nothing to smile about in my life. And so when I experience a hard Saturn transit to my moon, I just think, well, yeah, there's nothing to smile about in my life. But when you consider Dave's chart and his temperament with that moon in Sagittarius, sextiling the Jupiter and Uranus, he is kind of like, he's not used to that. He has plenty to smile about in his life as far as he's concerned. He's a bit more wild. And so when he experiences a transit like this, I don't think he can handle it. And I think he's going to try and run from those domestic responsibilities and demands. Anyways, so around this time, he also had Jupiter conjunct his fourth house, which is about getting comfortable and complacent, at home, maybe too much time spent at home. And I actually went back and looked because I knew he was at home during this period within mid 2023. I knew he was at home and I went back and looked at the tour dates and he wasn't on tour. So this Jupiter squared his Mercury. So it was conjunct his fourth house, hovering around his fourth house. It went retrograde a couple times. Jupiter conjunct his fourth house and it was square his Mercury, which again is a ruler of his fifth house. Square his Mercury and opposite his natal Mars, which is, in my opinion, a huge promiscuity indicator. And it triggered the natal square he has between Mars and Mercury, which I mentioned before, is primed in his chart to cause some kind of scandal, particularly regarding romance or children, some kind of secret regarding Mercury ruling the fifth and the eighth house. He also had, around this time, an eclipse opposite his natal Mars. So he's got transiting Jupiter conjunct his fourth house, squaring his Mercury, opposite his Mars, and then he's got an eclipse triggering that Mars, which, as I said, that has something to do with some kind of natal promise he has in his chart to lose some kind of status and reputation due to some kind of secret about some kid or relationship. Anyways, he was also experiencing around this time solar arc Mars equals Uranus. So actually, I'll draw it like this. Mars equals Uranus, which I think has a lot to say about somebody being impulsive and acting out of character. And then he also had that same Mars, solar arc Mars, equaling his nodes, which, in my opinion, is some kind of insatiable sexual appetite. Do you see how this particularly is all stacking up on top of each other to be some kind of like sex thing, some kind of scandal? You take this into account with the feeling like he's unsatisfied at home, he's too comfortable at home, things like that, blah blah blah. Around this time as well, he also had this his progressed moon squaring his natal Venus. We covered that. His progressed moon was square his natal Venus, and he also had transiting Jupiter sextiling his natal Venus at the same time that progression was active. This is that indulgence thing I keep bringing up. And then, so we had depression at home, feeling kind of down in the dumps, all of that sexual energy, and then all of the coping going on with the transiting Jupiter sextiling his natal Mercury, and then his progressed moon squaring his natal Venus. On the 7th of March 2024, so we're into 2024 now, transiting Saturn conjuncted his Venus, which I think you can see here. He's transiting Saturn, it conjuncted his Venus a little bit later on. And again, sorry for the snorting. Something like it slammed the fucking brakes on his life and shit suddenly got real. He also had transiting Mars conjunct his natal Mercury, which again, like I'm not going to look at transiting Mars for everything, but considering when Saturn conjuncted his Venus, and I'm like, oh, shit's getting real around this time, and then transiting Mars was triggering this square that I keep bringing up about some scandal regarding his love life. It's like the brakes got slammed on, like he slammed the fucking brakes on his life. If I had to guess, I think people in his circle knew about this pregnancy around this time. If not, it was him finding out about this pregnancy around this time. But if I had to guess, like people in his circle would have known. Maybe even people within just Los Angeles in general. Maybe this was like a very public kind of secret. And yeah, so transiting Mars conjuncted his natal Mercury on the 1st of March, and then transiting Saturn conjuncted his Venus about a week later. After this, so we had all that sexual energy, the depressed energy, coping energy. After the brakes got slammed on in his life, he had transiting Saturn trining his midheaven from the 2nd. This is like him getting back to work, damage control, something like that. He also had an eclipse conjunct his natal Saturn. So there were changes going on in his life because Saturn rules his first house, changes going on with him. And then that Saturn, with it trining the midheaven, also made a sextile to his ascendant. So we've got constructive Saturn stuff happening now. And this is basically him, like, in my opinion, like locking the fuck in. Like I said, the brace got slammed on his life. All of that stuff before doesn't matter anymore. He needs to lock the fuck in around this time. And then transiting Jupiter ended up progressing into his fifth house of children. He experienced a solar arc of Neptune equals Sun, which is kind of like the disillusion disillusionment around his own ego, the dissolving of his own ego, surrendering to his ego. This Jupiter in his fifth house then went on to make a trine to Mercury in his first house. Mercury rules his fifth house. The baby was born on August 1st. This was all occurring in late July. And then Jupiter also sextiled his natal Saturn, which is his chart ruler, and his baby was born around this time. And then a month later, I think it was, I said September 14th. No, I didn't. I just said in September 2024 was when he made that announcement that vague announcement that he had a kid outside of his marriage. On the 18th of September 2024, there was an eclipse opposite his Pluto. He has Pluto in the eighth house natally. There was an eclipse in his second house opposite that Pluto. The secret's out, basically. That was when the secret came out, when that eclipse like triggered the Pluto thing. And then, so that was all the progressions and the transits and the solar arcs. If we look at his solar return chart now, what can we see? Um, I wonder if this is the best way to do it. Yeah, maybe. Right, he had his sun. No, I think I'll do it the solar chart on its own. So in a solar return chart, the sun is going to be the most important thing you want to look at, but I interpret it as a standalone chart and then compare it to the natal chart. Anyways, sun in seventh house, themes of relating are going to be major this year for Dave Grohl. Also, the ascendant of the solar return chart falls in his natal sixth house, but leaning into the seventh. So, daily life and relationships, again, huge theme for him this year. And then I think I can go back to his bi-wheel. Hold on. So I wanted to get that out of the way to show you that the solar return sun was in the seventh house. And also, I just wanted to specify I don't do relocation charts. I always cast solar return charts for the birth location. I don't know where he was when when the solar return happened for him. He could have been anywhere. I don't know. I do it for the birth location because it's based on the natal chart, basically. Um, but that's a whole other spiel. Okay. He had his solar return moon conjunct his natal Venus. Again, it's another moon Venus thing going on here, but this is like exact. More themes of coping, more themes of self-soothing. This solar return moon was also square his it was so this solar return moon conjunct his natal Venus, but square the solar return Venus. So he's already experiencing all of that moon Venus stuff I mentioned before. It's also showing up in the solar return chart very prominently. This is more coping, self-soothing, huge coping, boredom, and indulgence. Issues with women as well, because Venus and Moon are correlated with the women in a man's life. Women are a huge theme of this year. He's got his wife. He's got three daughters, now four, and his mistress. They are dominating his life this year. Also, with it being a cardinal ascendant, going back to the solar return chart, cardinal ascendant, this is a emotional year of movement and change. Some solar return years are kind of just kind of like blah. Fixed angles typically mean there is some kind of like a financial, a lot of the time there's like a financial focus for the year and things staying the same. Mutable angles, years of learning, and these are kind of the years that kind of pass us by, whereas cardinal angles, these are the years of movement and change. The solar return Mars was in Capricorn conjunct the descendant, sorry. Sometimes when I look at charts, I've mentioned this before, I get phrases in my head, and what I heard was, let's sort this out. Let's just sort this out. Also, there are no oppositions in the solar return chart. This was not like a relating year for him. This was about him sorting his shit out, locking the fuck in. He's focused. He goes, I'm the prize. I just thought this was a really interesting kind of case study with the all the natal stuff and like the cheating um, behavior you might be able to potentially see in someone's natal chart. And then also, I just think it's really fun to look at the progressions to get like an insider look of what was actually going on with him around the time he would have been going to bed with this other woman because I'm assuming the kid was born full term. So we can see when the child would have been conceived and what was going on with him. And then I just thought it was so interesting how it was like literally the brakes were like slammed on his life and he was immediately going into damage control mode. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.